Welcome to European Journeys. This is the 10th stage of a series in which we explore the Christianization of Norway. If you have followed the series since the beginning, you will remember that we visited, most of the locations we visited are obviously in Norway, except one stage when we visited England. But for this stage, we are again going abroad, and the nation we are going to go to is France. And as you look at the map, you can see there obviously the French capital, Paris, and the region we are going to focus on today is on the western side of the French capital, and the name of the region is Normandy. And as we zoom in, we see there that the major city of Normandy is Rouen, R-O-U-E-N, it's pronounced Rouen in French, and that's the city that we are going to focus on today. Now, Rouen is not so far from Paris and probably suffers a little bit of, from the being in the shadows, I would say, of the French capital, because it has a lot to offer. It is quite a beautiful city as well. As you can see on the picture, it is located along the River Seine, just as Paris, and really is worth a visit as well. The major gem, the major jewel that Rouen has to offer is its own cathedral. Rouen's cathedral, as you can see on the picture, offers various types of architecture. And that's because the cathedral was, in fact, restored several times throughout the centuries. So you find there early Gothic, medieval architecture, as well as Renaissance, which came much later. Well, why are we visiting the Cathedral of Rouen? But that's because within that cathedral, two prominent Viking rulers were baptized more than 1,000 years ago. And so it is worth to visit this cathedral within the scope of our series, not just for one reason, but in fact for two reasons. And that is these baptisms. So therefore, we are going to visit a specific place there within the cathedral, and that is the baptistery that you can see on the picture. It is located within a tower named Saint-Romain on the ground floor of that tower. Now, the baptistery there might not be the one where these rulers were baptized, might not even be there on that site, on that specific spot, but nonetheless, that place is a big symbol, is a strong symbol of these baptisms, obviously. Now, I told you, two rulers from the Viking era. Now, who were those two rulers? This is what we are going to talk about now. Let's talk about the first one. The first ruler was a man named Rollo. Now, that's a Latin name. If you go to the sagas, the Norwegian sagas, such as Snorri Sturluson, Heimskringla, you will find the name Rolf or Rolf the Granger. But in Latin, he was renamed Rollo. Now, Rollo was a Viking ruler, participated in some of the earliest Viking expeditions in order to go abroad and conquer lands, usually destroying much of what they found when they ended up in the lands that they wanted to conquer. And so Rollo ended up there in Normandy. In fact, the name Normandy is a reminder of these Vikings because it simply means the land of the men of the North, of the Norsemen, Normandy. And so Rollo, who arrived there, converted to Christianity. Even though that was the faith of the people he had conquered, he adopted the faith of the people conquered. That's quite a miracle in itself. And he became the first Duke of Normandy. And so Rollo was baptized there in the Cathedral of Rouen. And even today you can see the gravestone of Rollo, which is along the choir. His gravestone is one of the four gravestones of the four prominent dukes of Normandy that are there in the cathedral. He is one of those four that is there. So that's for the first ruler. As I said, this ruler alone would make a good reason to visit Rouen just for Rollo. But in fact, as I said, there is a second ruler, even more important, more famous certainly, known not just in Norway, but pretty much all around the world. He has churches in his name in many places all around the world. Well, I'm talking obviously about a man named Olaf Haraldsson, also known as King Olaf II, and posthumously known as Saint Olaf. So, for the rest of this stage, we are going to talk a little bit about him, and I'm going to explain a little bit the early phases of his life until his baptism there in Rouen. So, Olaf Haraldsson was born around the year 995, and that's the year when the first Olaf Tryggvason, became king of Norway. And so it's an important year for Norway, and that's around that year that he was born. Now, the similarity with the first Olaf is not limited to the name. Olaf Haraldsson also was born as an orphan, just as Olaf Tryggvason. His father died while his mother was pregnant. And so he was raised by a stepfather named Sigurd Sur, but his stepfather was not a Christian, and so he was raised to become a Viking ruler, that is, to go abroad and conquer lands, as was really the custom for these pagan Norwegians at the time. At the age of 12 only, he participated to his first expedition, and that was to the Baltic lands, and then shortly after went to England, one of the favorite destinations of the Vikings, and spent there several years. Then we read in the early accounts that eventually he became allied with the King of England, Ethelred the Unready, to fight against the King of Denmark, who was invading Britain at the time. And he fought a famous battle, that was the Battle of London, and this is when London Bridge fell down. You know the song, London Bridge fell down, in fact, there at that time in the year 1012. And it fell down because Ethelred and Olaf broke it in order to stop the Danes to enter into London. Well, that did not suffice. Finally, the Danes won the battle, and so Ethelred, Olaf, and all their armies had to flee out from Britain. And so they crossed the Channel and arrived in Normandy. Now, at the time in Normandy, the Duke was named Richard II, and he was also engaged in a war with the Count of Brittany named Odo. And so Olaf arrived at the appointed time for Richard II, fought the battle together with Richard, and won it. And it's around those years, it's around that time, that Olaf Haraldsson converted to Christianity. Now, there's a lot of accounts from the medieval times that relate to these events. Not all of them agree. And of course, Snorri Sturluson, we have quoted quite a lot of time already in our past episodes, mentions his conversion. But we have a source that might be more accurate, and that is because it was written by a man who lived at the same time as Olaf Haraldsson. So maybe his accounts could be taken more seriously because of being closer to the dates. His name is Guillaume de Jumièges in French, William of Jumièges in English, and he wrote a famous manuscript, a prominent manuscript known as Gesta Normannorum Ducum in Latin, that is the Chronicles of the Duke of Normandy. And here is what he wrote regarding Olaf's conversion. And here I quote: King Olaf, having taken pleasure in the Christian religion, abandoned the worship of idols, together with some of his people, upon the exhortation of Robert, Archbishop of Rouen, was washed by baptism and anointed with holy oil by the Archbishop, and full of joy at the grace he had received, he then returned to his own kingdom. End of quote. So if you look at this text, you realize that Guillaume de Jumièges says that having taken pleasure in the Christian religion, that is, being converted, the result of that is that he abandoned the worship of idols. Now, idols are basically false gods, and these false gods generated a wrong worldview, a wrong understanding of the reality all around. And so he converted from these idols to the true God, and therefore began to learn to look at the world from the biblical worldview. Now, it didn't happen in one day, and in fact, the biblical worldview will take many centuries to shape Norway, but nonetheless, this was a crucial moment for the future king of Norway, Olaf. Well, what we can say also about Olaf and about his conversion and about the conversion of Rollo is really that Rouen is such a key place to understand the Christianization or the conversion of the Norwegians. And as I said already, we find there the graveyard, the gravestone of Rollo within the church. And in fact, for now, since a few years, Olaf's relics are also there. That's obviously because we're in a Catholic church. That's something that is very important for the Catholics. And so this is also a sign, a reminder of Olaf's baptism there in the cathedral. But if you walk around the city, you find several mentions of these two men. For example, there's a street named Rue Rollon in the city center, named after Rollo. And even in a suburb, you find an impasse Olaf, small street there. And also, there is even a Norwegian Protestant chapel within the city named after Saint Olaf. So as I said, really, Rouen is an important place to understand how the Norwegians came to faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. Well, I'm Cedric Placentino. See you next time for another stage of European Journeys.